This is El Salvador Centaur, located in the United States as the world's most dangerous country. Dangers that just 8 to 9 years ago it was the world's murder capital. It is said because every day these averages are 16 to 20 people. Between 2014 and 2017, the situation here was so bad that the gang, about 20,000 people, were killed in the warriors and 20% of the population had to flee the country. But in just 4 years, the world's most dangerous country is now on the list of safest countries in the world, where the crime rate is now lower than even America. El Salvador is the smallest country in Central America, but geopolitically it is a very important country because of its location. El Salvador is between Guatemala and Honduras in the south of Mexico and then has a coastline with the Pacific Ocean, so it is also accessed up to the Panama Canal. That is, if the government is destabilized here, then the gangs here are one of the world's very large trading square points, can also damage the Panama Canal and so on. That's why the United States has always had a lot of interest in El Salvador. The relationship between the two countries is so close that in 2003, when the US invaded Iraq, El Salvador was the only country in the Latin Emirates that joined the US alongside all the airports in El Salvador. But for the next few years, these families continued to control El Salvador. Then from 1930 to 1970, there was a military dictatorship in El Salvador, and they continued to bring about land reforms that were beneficial to these 14 families. This resulted in a fierce civil war against the government. The conflict escalated so much that both the government and far left and far right political wings started a devastating civil war that lasted until 1992, where 65,000 people were killed. Throughout, the US supported the El Salvadoran government with financial and arms aid. Approximately 500,000 people fled El Salvador to various South American countries, and many migrated to the American city of Los Angeles, which was already the focal point of gang warfare at the time. These gangs started targeting the new El Salvadoran immigrants. This led to the people of El Salvador forming their own community in response. This later became infamous as the MS-13 gang. Originally created to protect their families, the community turned into a gang of hardened criminals spreading crime across American cities. After the end of the Civil War in 1992, the US began deporting these gang members back to El Salvador. With El Salvador's economy and institutions completely devastated following the war, these gangs capitalized on the situation. The deported gang members maintained their connections with criminals in the US and with their assistance began smuggling weapons from the US into El Salvador. These weapons were then trafficked. Anyone who refused or tried to inform the police was killed. Between the years 2000 and 2011, Salvador completely went under the control of the gangs. The government was totally helpless and there was a lot of fear among the common people. El Salvador's prisons were filled with gang members, but still it did not matter at all. But the situation was getting worse and worse. People were also afraid to send their children to school for fear of being kidnapped. El Salvador's people were trying to go to America legally and illegally, and seeing the flood of so many immigrants, the American administration was also upset. The American administration sent a message to the government of Salvador to start taking strict action against these gangs. But it seemed that the government of Salvador was also afraid of these gangs. In 2015, the government of Salvador passed a law declaring gangs as terrorist groups. Even for gang members who commit minor crimes, a sentence of up to 60 years was announced. But still, the crime rate did not make any difference. The government also tried to negotiate with the gangs in El Salvador, but all tactics have failed. People were very angry with the government. In 2019, a young social media political activist became extremely popular among the people. He became well known. His name was Nayib Bukele. Nayib was the mayor of San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. He spoke openly about the deteriorating law and order situation in El Salvador and heavily criticized the government for its soft approach. According to him, the only way to reduce El Salvador's crime rate was to adopt a zero-tolerance policy on gangs. People greatly admired his viewpoint, and as a result, he won 53% of the vote in 2019. He became the president of El Salvador, and this is where the transformation story of El Salvador starts. Bukele started working on his plan as soon as he was in power. Firstly, he introduced a bill in the assembly to borrow $19 million from the United States, which was rejected by the legislators. In response, government forces entered the Capitol building and threatened the legislators, and then on final public pressure, the assembly allowed the loan. He built a maximum security prison for 40,000 prisoners on 410 acres, and he gathered 28,000 police and 24,000 military personnel and formed a joint force that patrolled the cities of El Salvador all the time and arrested the gang members by conducting recce in the cities of El Salvador and arresting them in this 410-acre maximum security prison. The pressure on the gangs sent in me started to fall, but there was not much difference in the crime rate. But then, in March 2022, a very big gang war started, in which about 100 people were killed in 3 days. Bukele immediately passed a special exemption bill from the assembly, according to which, for the next 30 days, the government forces could arrest any industrialist and search his house, and in some cases, he was also given the right to shoot to kill. For 30 days, the case of any of these picked up industrialists could not run in a court. 70,000 in the next few months. Times people were arrested. Those who tried to resist even a little were shot there. By the end of 2022, the murder rate in El Salvador had dropped to 56%. And in 2023, El Salvador's crime rate fell below the United States. Today, the people of El Salvador are roaming the markets freely. There is no one to threaten or extort businesses and shopkeepers. There is no one, and all the credit goes to Deputy Bukele, whose approval rating has crossed 90% in just 2 years. Many leaders in Latin America are now thinking of adopting policies such as Bukele to control the crime rate. But many analysts think El Salvador, to eliminate the crime rate, has had to pay a very heavy price, and that is the price that Bukele. The past now has inquisitable power. The special executive law was passed for 30 days. He has been extended 22 times and is active till today's date, because of which 2% of the population of El Salvador is in prison, and right now, no trial has yet begun, according to local journalists. There are many innocent people among them whose families do not even have this. Know which prison they are in or whether they are alive or not. Mejia, whose daughter has been picked up by the forces for 1.5 years, and he still doesn't even know which prison he's in. Like, there are thousands more cases, which shows that this law is it's proving to be very scary for people. In January 2022, Bukele's forces raided the offices of prosecutors investigating corruption charges against his government. They intimidated them so much that 4 investigators fled El Salvador. All these cases were squashed. On one hand, there's no doubt that Bukele has led the miraculous transformation of El Salvador. But on the other hand, he's become so powerful throughout this process. His government is now unaccountable to anyone, which might not be safe. It was necessary to do all this, but it's unsure if this unchecked power will prove to be stable for El Salvador in the future. Only time will tell that. Share your thoughts in the comments whether this was the best way for El Salvador or there was another much better way. That's also a big question. Read also in the comments if there was a way that was beneficial in terms of consequences. Please leave your opinions in the comments because we appreciate them. We love reading your comments. Here are the sources we used to make this video. If you thought the video was good, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video. Take care and God bless.